Romans 12, verse 1 and 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
So who else has been addicted to the Gold Zone on Peacock for the last few days? Yeah? So good. So good. It's like all the best, like the drama, the competition. Like I'm all in on it this year. I'm all in on it every year. I love the Olympics. I did my report in ninth grade on Baron de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympic Games. So my nerddom goes pretty deep in that. But I remember reading something in the after the 2021 Olympics that the number of gym memberships in the country just like spiked after the Olympics. Some like ridiculous percent of people like watching it, kind of getting inspired, and it makes sense. Like we see these bodies in their prime, like, and we're inspired by it. We see somebody like Simone Biles, like who just look, it just absolutely dominates at her sport. And we imagine a parallel universe in which like our bodies can do something like that. Although to be clear, there is no multiverse anywhere where any of us can ever do what Simone Biles can do. But just for a moment, when we're watching athletes at the prime, like we catch a glimpse of a different vision of life. And it fires up our desire. And that desire is often short-lived because the vision just can't be sustained. And it kind of reminded me of people who make New Year's resolutions. Any resolution people out here every year? A couple, like you guys are in the majority, those of you who make resolutions. The rest of us are definitely in the minority. But according to a recent study by Forbes, 62% of Americans made New Year's resolutions last year. And here are the most common ones. You can't read them, but I'll read them for you. And there's some overlap in case you're wondering like why the percentages don't add up. But 48% physical fitness goals, improving finances at 38%. Improving mental health, 36%. Losing weight, 34%. Improving diet, 32%. Followed by making more time for loved ones at 25%. Way down there at the bottom at 3% is performing better at work. Which, is a little bit surprising to me because Americans, like, we rank like the worst at like actually taking our vacation time. But when asked, in 2023, 80% of respondents who made these lofty goals felt that they were confident in actually being able to achieve them. But at the same time, only 20% of those surveyed had an actual plan or accountability for their goals. So with an ironclad plan like that, you can imagine what happened, right? When followed up with at the end of the year, 8% of New Year's resolutions fell away by January, another 22% dropped in February, and 23% dropped in March, which means that over the course of a little while, little more than half did not last through the first quarter of the year. In fact, researchers found that only 6% of people kept their resolutions to the year's end. And as a result, 74% of those confident yet unaccountable people were at the end of the year wondering what on earth went wrong. And wondering maybe if they had grown a little bit cynical about their chances of, beating the counter-reformative quartet of Xbox, TikTok, Netflix, and a comfortable couch. But given that even that 6% is a little bit misleading because it doesn't define success very well. Because the point of a resolution is not to do a thing, to check off a list, right? It's to enjoy a different kind of life on the other side of that thing and in pursuit of that thing. You might commit to a gluten-free diet to feel more energetic, or you might practice interval training because you heard that it's the best way to boost your metabolism and shred fat and all that stuff. Or you might decide to read more books because you think it'll be more life-giving than like binging season 6 of Cobra Kai. Although it was so far, it's a good one. It's like telenovela meets karate. It's the best. But the goal of those things is not to endure a life without bread, right? Or to have a stack of 12 novels, piled up by your bedside. But it's to actually feel better because you have, slowly removed the effects of an allergen from your body, or to, be more engaged in the world of ideas, or to have your horizons expanded like only a good novel can do. A goal is always in service to a vision of a particular kind of life. And if the vision is strong enough, we pursue it. Not simply because there's joy on the other side, but because the pursuit actually changes us along the way. And to make that vision a reality, we need the means and the intention to step on into it. And nowhere is that more true than in the spiritual life. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a man who saw a treasure in a field and he sold everything he had to go and buy that field. That's what it takes: vision, intention, and means. How many times have you come to church on Sunday or heard an inspiring podcast, and you've been kind of moved at a gut level by the Holy Spirit to change something about your life, and it really hits you deep. You've got this desire kind of welling up in you. You have a vision of what life could be like. Maybe you journal about it, or you pray about it in your night before you go to bed. But then by Monday afternoon, you're just back right in that same old pattern. Just me. Cool. And your problem and my problem isn't knowledge. I know what I need to know. You know what you need to know. Problem is that information transfer alone is not enough to produce transformation in your life, because knowing something is not the same thing as doing it, which is still not the same thing as wanting to do it. And that's why every single one of us, there's this massive gap between what we know and what we do, and still another massive gap between what we do and what we actually want to do. So today we are launching into a new fall rhythm. Welcome back to 2 services. And we are launching into this new series about what it is that we mean when we say practicing the way of Jesus for the renewal of all things. And a core conviction of ours here at All Souls is that following Jesus is just that. It is a way of life. It is that faith is not just a set of beliefs about reality. It involves an embodied set of practices, habits, relational rhythms that we see in Jesus' life. And so every now and then we will arrange our community groups and our sermons on Sunday mornings around a particular practice that we see in the life of Jesus. But in the next 7 weeks, rather than introduce you to a new practice, we're going to take a look over the 6 practices that we've gone over the last 4 years. Sabbath, Scripture, prayer, simplicity, hospitality, and fasting. And right from the beginning, I want us to not get so focused on the practices themselves. I want to actually direct your attention beyond the practices to the real question that we have is, what are they doing to us? How have they shaped your life so far? How have they gotten into your bones and into your muscle memory? Because before I think about the renewal of all things, I need to think about how has the Spirit been working transformation and renewal in me. And to know the fruit of the practices, you got to keep your eyes focused on the why of the practices, what it is that they are supposed to do to us. The aim of all of them is to be shaped in the image of Jesus for the sake of others, for the sake of our world. And so my hope over the next few weeks is that you carve out a little bit of time and space before all the mania of the new rhythms kind of hits you with the start of school and all that stuff, and all that things start to crowd out your life, to simply take a look beyond the surface of things as to what it is that God is actually doing in your life. What is your deepest longing for him? What is it telling you? Pete Scazzaro has this beautiful line in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Nurturing a growing spirituality with depth will require a conscious, intentional plan for our spiritual lives. And I get it, like, planning sounds totally unromantic, right? But I think this language is really important. He isn't suggesting that we are in control of our spiritual development, because we're not. We are not in charge of our spiritual growth. What the Reformers called sanctification, that's not something that we control. And one of the first lessons in taking spiritual formation seriously is learning just how little control we have over it. We are not widgets in a factory that we can add a few things to and then pop out a different kind of life. But what we can do is we've got the choice every day to present ourselves to God day after day, consistently, through practices, in relationships, in how we direct our time, how we direct our attention, in this posture of surrender to the Spirit. Or we can be carried away by the currents of our culture that has been training us for years to live simultaneously with constant motion and partial attention. But the fact that we don't dictate how God is going to change our lives does not mean that our role in this process is entirely passive. We plan for everything that we value, right? Whether that's a relationship, whether that's your job, your career, a dream, your marriage. So my question is, what would happen if we actually approached our spiritual lives that way? What would happen if our life with God didn't entirely depend on the undulation of our feelings, or by the hurry, by the digital distraction, by the near constant burnout and low-grade anxiety that have become the standard operating system of our culture? What if there is a better option available? Well, writing to a community of Jesus followers in Rome, Paul begs the church to, in light of the grace and forgiveness of sin that's made possible in Jesus through the death and resurrection of Jesus, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Offer your whole self, every part of who you are. Surrender this to God. This is what worshiping God means. He goes on, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And this is the heart of what I want to get at this morning. This verb conform here, that's italicized up in the text on the screens, it's actually, in Greek, it's in the middle voice. I'm going to nerd out for just a few minutes, but I think there's something in this for us. Which means that this is something that we do to ourselves. This conforming process, it's something that we participate in. We do it. But by contrast, the verb transformed or be transformed is in the passive voice, meaning that it's something that is done to us. And so Paul is telling the community, like, there is a both and at play here. He's telling them to resist. He's telling them, on the one hand, don't be tied to somebody else's vision or agenda for your life. Don't be shackled by the mold that your culture has for you. That's only going to distance you from yourself and from God. Instead, embrace a new vision of reality. Arrange your whole life, your routines, your habits, your relationships, the whole constellation of who you are, where you direct your attention, so that every day it is given to your ongoing daily life with God. Allow yourself to be transformed by setting your mind on what it is that God has for you. And no, this is not a one-time act. Again, told you, I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds here. But the word be transformed, metamorphao, which you all remember from, whatever grade you were in when you studied, caterpillars turning into butterflies, right? In this passage, it's a present indicative in the middle voice. You all know exactly what that means, so I'm not even going to go into it. No, meaning that this is not a one-time thing. This is not actually like that transformation of a caterpillar to a butterfly. This is something that God is doing consistently in our lives, year after year, day after day, moment after moment. It's something that the Spirit is constantly doing, this work of transformation. Meaning that the process of our being shaped in the image of Jesus is this process of progressively replacing destructive images, patterns of thought, habits, actions, behaviors, and replacing them with the kinds of things that filled the mind of Jesus. On a neurobiological level, our brains, our minds, they are not static entities that cannot be changed. They can be changed. They can be renewed by what we continually set our directed attention upon. You can actually change your brain. You can rewire your neurobiology, even your body itself. Because the mind, what we think about, what we give our attention to, what we focus on, what gives rise to repeated actions. It's like the gateway of our whole being. It directs the development of our overall person. So Paul is saying, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. In other words, where you direct your attention is the linchpin of your spiritual formation. Annie Dillard has this line, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And one of the reasons that we gather each week to read Scripture is so that our minds will constantly be shaped by the story of God's grace in Jesus. And Paul says, as a result of this, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will. This is how you will know how to live as a citizen of the kingdom right in the middle of the world, right in the middle of the place where God has planted you. And all of the language that he uses in here, all they use here, they're all plural. And so he goes on to describe things like practicing hospitality and forgiving one another and welcoming enemies and giving generously and worshiping and praying. To be a transformed people, it's something that we have to do together. You need the gifts and graces of the people around you. You need the rhythms and the structures of a common life together, governed by the Spirit, to index your hearts toward God, to become more loving, more joyful, more humble, more at ease, more grateful, more content, and more at peace, to become a non-anxious presence in a city, yes, even in the middle of an election year. And you do this by following a simple path. We grow more and more into people of love, joy, peace in the way of Jesus by constantly setting our minds on him, by turning our attention, the habits of our bodies, how we arrange our days. And you hear that, and I'm not immune to this fact that the question runs into us, just like people who see Olympic athletes and think, I got to get to the gym. Right? The question is okay, great, be transformed. How do I sustain that? How does that happen? The thing is, that's not an entirely new question. That's not a product of late modern life. That's a human question. The disciples asked it as well. And the answer they came up with is to create a kind of scaffolding for their faith, what later came to be called a rule of life. The earliest followers of Jesus began to take on a set of practices and rhythms. We see this as early as the church is alive. In the book of Acts, we are told that following his ascension, Jesus' followers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and they had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This is how they lived their life together. And there were things like gathering together around a table to talk about Jesus' vision for their lives and for the world. And this vision that was so radically different than the world around them. And they talked about it. They told stories. They held up that vision to keep the fire alive. And then they gathered together. They broke bread. They prayed. They gave generously to one another. They met in worship. These were the means by which they resisted the patterns of the world. And those patterns would have divided them by race, by class, by ethnicity, by language, by social status. Also, the Spirit could bring about transformation in their lives. And this went on for years in the life of the church. Every generation, new ones would create new structures and new rhythms. In the 3rd century, desert mothers and fathers saw the marriage of political power and to the Christian story, and they saw this is going to be a shipwreck. And so they took off to the wilderness. Initially so they could live lives of simplicity and prayer, but then they started having such a reputation for holiness that people started to gather around and they were attracted to the way of life. And so these little communities started to pop up and they would craft a scaffolding for their faith and their common life together. In the 4th century, Celtic Christians from this small island in Iona came and they found a guideline for living that not only allowed their communities to flourish, but that in just a few generations evangelized a whole hostile nation. And then a few hundred years later, Benedict of Nursia created this comprehensive rule of life for this order that would bear his name. And I get it, this term rule of life, like it's ancient language, it sounds a bit off-putting, probably totally unappealing to modern ears. But I think it's actually a pretty vital framework for the future of the church. And importantly, it's rule of life singular, not rules of life plural. It's not primarily a list of do's and don'ts. It might include some of those, but that's not generally what it's about. The original Latin word is regula, which gives us words like regular and regulation. It means a straight piece of wood. Writer Joan Chittister describes it like this. Regula, now the word now translated to mean rule, in the ancient sense meant guidepost or railing. Something to hang on to in the dark, something that leads in a given direction, something that points out the road, something that gives us support as we climb. And many people believe that it referred to a trellis in a vineyard. If you've ever been to one of those, you know that vines don't grow on the ground or on the rocks. They grow on a trellis, something to lift them up off the ground, to direct their growth toward the light, to give them the space so that they can bear the maximum fruit. And without a trellis, vines die or they get trampled on or they get subject to disease. Similarly, in John 15, Jesus used the metaphor of abiding in the vine to describe what spiritual formation is all about. And so early Christians, they just extended this metaphor, concluding that just as a vine needs a trellis, so do we need a support structure for our lives with God. Something to help us grow in the right direction. And so for our purposes, we're going to define a rule of life like this. An ordered set of practices, relational rhythms, and commitments guided by the Spirit, through which we live in alignment with our deepest desire for God's deepest transformation. You can think of it as a plan for practicing the way of Jesus. Or more simply, Andy Crouch describes it as a set of practices to guard our habits and to guide our lives. To go back to Paul's language in Romans, it's a way of resisting the pull of to conform with the assumptions and embodied habits of the world, and a means to open up space for the Spirit to work. So I was thinking about why this is important for us. There's this scene in the Odyssey in which Ulysses, he and his band of men, they're just trying to get back to his beloved Penelope in Ithaca. But he's ticked off Poseidon, so he keeps throwing up all these creatures and obstacles and things that get in his way. And one of those obstacles, and there are many perilous journeys, is to come across the island of the Sirens. And the Sirens are these beautiful mythical creatures known for their amazing singing voice. And they have this habit of whenever you hear the singing voice, it would drive men crazy. They would throw themselves overboard to be with them, where the Sirens would drown them or beat them to death. They took particular pleasure in seducing men only to kill them. I don't know who hurt Odysseus as he was coming up with these characters, or Homer. Anyway, so they had to go by this island, and Ulysses knows that he's going to go crazy if he hears their song. But he also knows that the insanity is only going to be temporary, and he really wants to hear it. He wants to be the guy who heard the siren song and lived to tell the tale. But he doesn't want to do anything with the irreversible consequences, so he fashions this plan. He tells his soldiers to put wax in their ears and then tie him to the mast of the ship so that they can't hear it. And then when he wants to go crazy and go overboard, he won't be allowed to because he will be tied to the ship. He'll be restrained in a way that he can't act on his desires. And depending on who you are or where you are in your life with God, you can think of a rule of life as either the wax in your ears or the binding to the mast. And I think this matters because as followers of Jesus, we are not immune to the sweeping generational cross currents. Our hearts are being shaped all the time. You know this. We carry infinity in our pockets. We're being shaped all the time on a device that will, knows our scrolling habits, our political affiliation, our online shopping profiles, and will feed those into an algorithm specifically designed to capture your attention. We also live in a post-Christian culture that's inundated with distractions and ideologies that whisper their songs seductively in our ears. To live a life of peace amid political polarization and digital distraction will require a means of counterformation. I'm 46. It's never been easier in my lifetime than now to completely waste your life. To be completely given over to distraction. Back in the 80s, there was this thing called boredom. It was amazing. You'd be in a grocery line and you'd have to sit there because there's nothing to do. Right around the time, a social critic named Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and he wrote about the narcotic effect that TV and media was going to have on our culture, on American life. And interestingly, he predicted decades before social media or the iPhone or anything like that the two facets of American life that would be most devastated by the new media were religion and politics. And he imagined that the churches of the future and the political discourse of the future. He actually predicted that a celebrity would be president. It's kind of crazy. But he talked about how all those things are just going to kind of undermine both, the ways that we talk and the ways that those things are shaped. Russell Moore wrote a book recently called Losing Our Religion, which I think Sarah Bettini gave that to me, so thank you for that. And he has this line in there that, in an internet world, crazy has become the most effective church growth strategy. And I think that's true. And my point is that, it's never been easier to get lost in trivialities. You can vanish into the black hole of Netflix and Hulu and Instagram, and you can struggle to defy gravity. Or you might become a workaholic, or you might chase wealth and fame, or a bigger house, or you can immerse yourself in the adult playground of a city like ours. And all of that stuff is just a distraction to push back the deeper things that really make your heart come alive. As the social writer and Catholic priest Ronald Rolheiser put it, we are distracting ourselves into spiritual oblivion. But for all that, I'm still hopeful. Because I actually think the maelstrom in which we find ourselves gives rise to a lot of clarity. It helps us have this longing well up in us for a better vision. A little while ago, I came across this letter by Dietrich Bonhoeffer that he wrote to his brother Karl Friedrich. And his brother was like, "Why are you doing this thing? Why are you in this underground seminary?" And Bonhoeffer was trying to do something about a church that had completely given itself over and been completely secularized by the Third Reich. And he was trying to imagine a different way forward. Bonhoeffer came from money, and his brother was saying, dude, what you're doing is crazy. Come to your senses. And he wrote this: "The restoration of the church will surely come from a sort of new monasticism which has in common with the old only the uncompromising attitude of a life lived according to the Sermon on the Mount in the following of Christ. I believe it is now time to call people to do this. And what he envisioned was not, small bands of men and women who are completely cut off from society, but instead ordinary, everyday communities of people, men, women, married, single, bound together by a common vision and shared practices. And so he crafted this trellis for his community, this way of life together that helped them hold their love for God and their apprenticeship to Jesus to resist all of the forces of the culture that were coming all around them and the forces of disordered desires that were within them. And I think he's right. Now is the time to call people to this. From the digital algorithms and the political polarization, the rising tide of secularism in the church, let alone in the culture, and the black hole of the entertainment queue, what we do in here has to be stronger than all that. We need a scaffolding designed to offset these forces. More recently, John Mark Comer put it like this: I believe the invitation of Jesus in our day is to live as desert fathers and mothers in the middle of the city, to live with depth and serenity and focus right in the middle of the noise and traffic and hurry of the modern world, the both and of the active contemplative life. A renewed world needs a renewed church. And if we're going to become a community that's marked by grace and rest and engagement, contribution and reconciliation, we're going to need a trellis to help us draw the line between who we are now and who we are, the final version of our community that is made to look like Jesus. So that's what we're going to be up to over the next 7 weeks. Looking over some of the practices that serve as a means of grace, the time-tested things that the church has come across to open space for the Spirit's transformation, to build toward an intentional approach to our life with God. And if it's all possible, do this in community. The roommate, do it with a friend, do it with a community group. If you're not in one of those, email me. We want to help you get in one. We've got a community guide that's designed to help you reflect. And it just begins with this honest assessment as best as you can. Like, where are you now in your life with God? How has God been shaping you over the last few years? How is fixing your attention on God through particular rhythms and relationships, how has it produced transformation in you? And if you don't know, ask somebody close to you. And just see what it is that you notice. Where do you feel a nudge to pick something up? Where do you feel permission to drop something off your schedule? And it might not be what you think because, again, the process of formation, we're not in charge of it. This is not like, some sort of life hack or a way to manifest your best life now. Like, that's not what this is about. It's not a spiritual wellness plan. Because discipleship, fundamentally, it's not a system, it's a relationship. And systems they're predictable. Relationships are way, way more satisfying. The thing about relationships is, that's what discipleship is. It's this participating in this mysterious community of love that is known as the Trinity. And so before we start all this, I just want you to abandon all your thoughts about what you think it ought to look like and just pay attention to what is the invitation that God has for you in this moment of your life. Turn off any of those nagging voices in your head that are all about what you think it should be. It's not about obligation. It's not about earning. A trellis is not the vine. The vine is Jesus. A trellis is just a way to posture our mind and our body to live in communion with Him. It's about responding to His work in you and asking the question, how can I give my attention? How can I give my time? How can I give myself? What is your invitation to be transformed? How can I offer my whole body, my whole life over to you? So just a little bit of encouragement as I close. Some of you might hear this and you're like, dude, this sounds daunting. This sounds hard. And honestly, there's a yes and there's a no to that. Yes, in the sense that living intentionally in accordance with your deepest desires, it takes work. I mean, Katie Ledecky did not wake up one morning and think, I'm going to swim 1,500 meters in 15 minutes. she said a whole lot of no's in order to say yes to the things that would allow her to do that. It's a narrow path, but in another sense, it's not that daunting. Because the thing is, you already have a rule of life. You already have like a set of rhythms, a set of commitments, a set of relationships. You already have practices and rhythms that are shaping you. Your heart is being shaped all the time. And whether that's through a regular practice of reading scripture and prayer in the morning, or whether that's through doom scrolling or looking at sexualized images as a way of coping with your profound loneliness. And I say that with no judgment. I say that with deep compassion. The question isn't whether you have a rule for life. The question is, what is really ruling your life? Is your current set of practices and habits helping you live according to the vision of life that you believe God has for you? Or does that vision seem further away with each day? To repeat Paul's language, it's about conforming you. Is your habit, is your practice, is it conforming you to the habits and assumptions of our culture? Or is it providing a space where you can be transformed? Is it based on your long-term desires, or is it based on instant gratification? Is it based on deep wisdom, or is it based on like some TikToker's hot take on something, right? Is it making you more kind, more gentle, more loving, or is it making you more increasingly anxious, angry, bitter, and hurt? Does it deepen your relationships, or does it pull you away from them? Is it leading you into a life of deeper rest and enjoyment of God? So think about your morning routine. Think about your budget. Think about your relationships. How are you arranging your time? How is God in the midst of all of that? How are you arranging your days so that sin no longer looks attractive to you? You might be surprised where the invitations lie. I read the story recently of a man named Carlo Corretto who spent 12 years in the Sahara Desert as a hermit. And he was translating the Bible into a Bedouin language. He had no company with him except for the Eucharist and his own prayer life. He milked a goat for his food every day. I'm not recommending this. But then one day he went back home to visit his mother, who for the last 30 years had been raising children. And what he found is that he, who had been committed to this life of asceticism out in the desert, this life of deep communion and prayer with God, and his mother, who had been raising children, and she was kinder, gentler, and more radiant with the love of Jesus than he was. And so what he found was that a monastery is not a place you go to escape. A monastery is anywhere where you realize that time does not belong to you. So maybe Jesus is not asking you in this season to do something new, to upend your life, to cut you off from the world. Maybe he's asking you to pay attention to the life you are already living, to see where he is present, to lean into those places where he is already working transformation and renewal. That's the invitation. Amen.